to make a strap for our bag, or any really strap that you're going to make, we can get some fabric. I'm going to use a woven fabric. I've just used quite a lightweight poplin because it's going to turn really easily. And I'm only going to do quite a small strap for this one. It's not going to be a long strap. If I was going to do a long strap, I'd need to use the length of the fabric down this way. This fabric's already been cut by some people a few times, so it's, I'd sort of have to cut off some of these odd bits. So I think I'll just do a small strap just to save fabric. So I'm going to just do a pre-cut here, and that's just going to make sure my edge is even, because I can see this was a cut edge. It's actually been cut with pinking shears, but it might not have been cut perfectly on the grain or cross grain of the fabric, which is the lines of thread of a woven fabric. But if I do a little cut and rip, that's going to rip that perfectly on the grain or the cross grain for a fabric like this of my fabric. So this is actually with the grain of the fabric. Now that, if you actually come to a fabric and see that kind of a ripped effect, you can actually be fairly confident that that line is already straight with your grain and you wouldn't have to do that pre-rip. But I wasn't very confident, so I did a pre-rip there. So I'm going to determine how thick I want my strap to be. I'm going to fold over here and sort of have a look at, how thick I want it to be in this thickness here. But I'm also going to remember that there's going to be seam allowance, shrinking that in a little bit. So I might want to add a bit more. So if I sort of put 1.5 centimeters, around about my thumb width is sort of 1.5 centimeters, I can sort of see the space in here is how thick my strap's going to be. So I can adapt my strap thickness based on that. So I'm going to put it about there. I'm going to put a little snip in there, and I will rip that and it will be straight. There we go. So I've got one straight piece. So this isn't a very long piece. You might have a much longer piece for your strap, depending on whether you want it to really, go over the shoulder and where you want it to fall to. I'm just doing a very small one for today because I don't want to waste fabric. So we're now going to fold it in half. Now, if you had a strap fabric that did have right sides of the fabric, like very clear right sides of the fabric, maybe it's got a print or it's only got color on one side, you would be putting right sides together here. So the right sides would be facing up at the moment, and then you would fold one right side on top of the other right side. So folding it all the way over, you can put a few pins in to help it stay in place, or you can do what I would normally do and be lazy and not pin it. Now you see it is warping a little bit here. It's sort of going off on a curve. That's just because sometimes when we pull on those threads, when we rip it, it does sort of shrink them in a little bit. So giving it a bit of a stretch might get it back to its normal shape, but I'm not too worried about that. Also giving it an iron will help as well. So we're going to take it to the machine and we are going to sew on a seam allowance down here. So I'm ready to sew. I'm on a straight stitch. I'm lining up my edge along the 5/8 guideline, and I'm going to do a back stitch at the start and at the end. Now that I've got my strap sewn, I'm going to use this little Duvalaki. This is called a loop turner. And I'm going to insert this into one end of my strap, bunch it up until it comes all the way through. Now, see how on the loop turner, there's like a little hook closure thing here, like this. I'm going to see if I can, it gets a little bit fiddly sometimes, but see if you can pierce that through the fabric, sort of near the top of the fabric, while also catching that top hook over the fabric there. So then it kind of naturally closes up. Now this is actually easy to do if you have a friend with you. You get the friend to hold this end and you can turn this end. I'm just going to try and do it on my own. You do need to keep a little bit of tension on this at all times, because otherwise if you let go of it, the hook might fall off the fabric and then you lose your fabric partway through. So you'll see what's happening is it's all kind of pulling in on itself here. Once it's through, you can see how it's through that far. It's actually safe now. I can take that off the hook if I want to now. And this is safe and will be fine to keep sliding through like this. Now I need to give this a really good iron, and I'm also going to iron the ends, tuck the ends in and iron them down as well. So I'll show you that on the ironing board. Now when I come to iron, I want to iron my strap so that my seam allowance here, or my seam, gets opened out and pulled all the way to one side. Doesn't matter which side you pull it to. But what we don't want to have happen is we don't want to just put our iron down on this, and for example, if I just put it here, it's kind of at the side, but it would be coming a little bit into one side. But I'm also ironing in a fold of fabric down there. So I want to fully open it out. So the easiest way to do this, get your start bit really pulled out and pulled flat into the side. Then you kind of use your iron, start ironing, and your iron will kind of hold it in place. I'm just going to check my heat setting because this is very lightweight cotton. So I'm actually going to put the heat setting down to the wool setting just so that I don't damage my fabric. You can see the difference there, how much nicer it's sitting as opposed to over there. And it's that seam allowance is all the way at the outside. So once I've got my strap turned all the way, ironed nicely open, I'm also just going to tuck my ends in while I'm at the iron and iron them down. They're only going to tuck in just about a centimetre, or a little less is fine, wherever it's easy. So I'm going to tuck mine in there and iron that one down. Now I'm ready to sew my strap onto my bag. So I'm going to sew my strap onto my bag along these seams here, near the seams here. Now, we already mentioned how that is a bulkier area. I used this fabric was actually a slightly heavier fabric too, so it is quite bulky. So if you're struggling with the bulk of it, what you can do is stitch just below the hem line along there. It does mean that you will see 2 extra lines of stitching. Instead of just seeing 1 line of stitching here, you'll see 2 lines of stitching. But if you're okay with that and you're worried about the bulkiness, you can stitch there. Otherwise, try to stitch along that same line that is already there so that you don't see them from the good side of your fabric. So I'm putting my strap onto here like this. Let's see how it goes. I might need to help it through a little bit. Now you can sew back and forward a couple of times to really secure it on. I have a very heavy, thick fabric there, so I'm not going to be too tough on it. But I did back stitch quite well at the start and end, so I'm pretty content that that strap's going to stay in place. Making sure we trim off all of those threads nice and close to the fabric, and then we stitch the other side down as well. When we come and stitch the other side down, it's really important that we check we're not getting a twist in our strap. So lay your bag down, put your strap in place, and check that it is not twisted around at all, because if you stitch a twist into it here, that twist is never going to come out. So make sure there's no twist, battling loose threads everywhere. no twist, and it's going to come in here. So now I just want to make sure I trim off all of my loose threads everywhere and clear them all off. You can trim them really close to your fabric. I wasn't perfectly neat with sewing that on, but it's not too bad, especially if I used a colour that camouflages in a little bit more than that bright red. So there I have my finished bag, and that's all you have to do to make your bag. There it is. Oop. There it is there.